Hi, Virgo. Watch what happens when reality catches up to someone's wrong assessment of you. They're about to experience the specific discomfort of being proven completely incorrect about capabilities they dismissed, potential they overlooked, value they failed to recognize. And that correction isn't coming from you defending yourself or arguing your case. It's coming from results speaking so loudly that their previous evaluation looks absurd in retrospect. What makes this unusual, what makes this the kind of development that rarely shows up in readings, is the scale of their miscalculation. This wasn't small oversight. They didn't slightly underestimate you. They fundamentally misjudged who you are and what you're capable of, building entire strategy around assumption that you weren't factor they needed to account for. And that foundational error is about to cascade through their plans in ways that force complete reassessment. Let me show you exactly what's unfolding. They made decision based on you being less than you are. Maybe they passed you over for opportunity because they thought you couldn't handle it. Maybe they ended relationship because they thought you wouldn't thrive without them. Maybe they competed against you, assuming easy win. And whatever the specific context, their choice was rooted in certainty that you were operating at level below where they were, that you lacked something essential they possessed, that underestimating you carried no risk because you weren't going to surprise them. That certainty is about to shatter. You're not just meeting the standard they didn't think you could reach, you're exceeding it in ways that make their assessment look incompetent. And the gap between what they thought you were capable of and what you're actually demonstrating is so wide that they can't explain it away as luck or timing or external factors. They have to confront that they were wrong completely about you. The underestimation had consequences for them. When you miscalculate someone's capabilities, you make strategic errors. You leave openings. You fail to prepare for outcomes you didn't think were possible. And they're about to discover that those errors matter, that underestimating you wasn't neutral. Mistake it put them at disadvantage. They're only now beginning to recognize. Here's what's happening in the different domains where this plays out. Professionally, you're achieving things they said weren't realistic for someone with your background. They made assumptions about your ceiling based on incomplete information or biased assessment. And you're demonstrating that their ceiling was fiction, that you're capable of performance they reserved for people they considered more qualified, which is forcing them to either acknowledge their evaluation process is flawed or maintain cognitive dissonance between what they believe about talent and what you're proving. The specific professional win that's coming or has just happened is going to be undeniable, not subjective success where people can debate whether you earned it, objective, measurable achievement, numbers that speak for themselves, recognition from authorities they respect, results that can't be dismissed as flukes. And that concrete evidence is what makes their underestimation indefensible. Personally, you're thriving in ways that contradict their narrative about who you are. If they thought you needed them, you're demonstrating independence. If they thought you were limited by your circumstances, you're showing adaptability. If they thought you'd crumble under pressure, you're performing under conditions that would break people they considered stronger. And every data point that contradicts their story about you is forcing them to either revise their understanding or double down on being wrong. Relationally, you're connecting with people at levels they didn't think you could access. Maybe they thought you weren't sophisticated enough for certain circles, and you're being welcomed into those spaces. Maybe they thought you weren't attractive enough to draw a specific quality of partner and you're in relationship that makes them question their own standards. And watching you operate in contexts they assumed were beyond your reach is triggering reevaluation of how they assessed your social value. The reversal is creating specific psychological effects in them. First comes confusion. The evidence doesn't match their model of reality. You aren't supposed to be doing this well. And their brain is trying to integrate new information with old beliefs, searching for explanations that let them maintain their original assessment while accounting for outcomes that contradict it. They're generating theories. Maybe you got help they don't know about. Maybe circumstances aligned in your favor. Maybe what you're achieving isn't as impressive as it appears. And these explanatory attempts are protective. They're trying to preserve their self-concept as good judge of capability by finding reasons your success doesn't invalidate their earlier dismissal of you. Then comes defensive behavior. They might minimize your achievements to others, might emphasize your advantages while downplaying your effort, might shift focus to domains where they still outperform you, because admitting they completely misjudged you means admitting fallibility they're not ready to own, means accepting that their confident assessment was based on blind spots or biases they'd rather not examine. For some, there's grudging respect emerging. They're starting to see you differently, starting to take you seriously as factor in their decisions, starting to treat you as someone whose capabilities they need to account for. And that shift in how they engage with you, from dismissive to cautious, from certain to uncertain, is them adjusting to new reality where you're not who they thought you were. What's particularly striking about this situation, the timing of your breakthrough. It's happening at a moment when their underestimation just locked them into position they can't easily reverse. Maybe they chose someone else over you for role that's now struggling. Maybe they committed to path that would have worked if you stayed small but doesn't account for you at new level. Maybe they burned bridge with you right before realizing they needed what you offer. That timing isn't coincidence. You weren't ready for this earlier. You needed the period where you were underestimated to build without interference, to develop without competition, to prepare without people trying to block you. And now that you're ready, now that you're emerging with capabilities you couldn't have demonstrated before, their earlier dismissal means they're not positioned to benefit from or defend against what you've become. The visibility of your success. This isn't quiet achievement they could ignore. Other people are noticing. Other people are talking about it. Other people who also underestimated you are updating their assessments. And that public nature of your emergence means they can't privately revise their view of you without others knowing they were wrong, which adds social costs to their miscalculation. Your demeanor about it, you're not gloating, not making them eat their words, not even addressing their underestimation directly, because you're too busy being excellent to waste energy on proving points to people who already proved they can't accurately assess you. And that focus on your work rather than on their opinion is somehow more devastating to their ego than if you were rubbing their face and being wrong. Here's what this reveals about them and about you. Their underestimation exposed their limitations. Good evaluators of talent see potential before it's fully realized. They missed it, which means either their assessment tools are flawed, or their biases prevented accurate seeing, or they lack imagination to recognize excellence that doesn't present in familiar packages. And any of those explanations raises questions about their judgment that extend beyond just their miscalculation about you. Your response to being underestimated shaped your development. Some people get bitter when dismissed. You got better. Use their low expectations as freedom to experiment, to take risks, to build without pressure of high surveillance. And that productive use of being overlooked is part of why your emergence is so strong. You weren't performing for their approval, you were building for your own standards. The power dynamics have shifted. When they underestimated you, they had power to include or exclude you, power to define your value, power to determine your opportunities. But your success has redistributed that power because now you have options, now you have leverage, now you have capacity to choose whether to engage with them or to let them deal with consequences of having missed who you actually are. What happens next depends on both of you. They might try to backtrack, might attempt to get close to you now that your value is undeniable, might act like they always believed in you. And how you respond to those attempts reveals your character, whether you're gracious about people who miss you or whether you remember who saw you when you weren't shiny yet. You get to decide what their underestimation costs them. If it's professional, maybe they lose access to your talents. If it's personal, maybe they lose place in your life. If it's competitive, maybe they lose advantages they had when you weren't full threat. And whatever consequences flow from their miscalculation, you're not required to protect them from those just because they're finally realizing they were wrong. The situation is teaching both of you, them, that surface level assessment misses important information. You that other people's limitations in seeing you don't limit what you're actually capable of becoming. And those lessons are valuable regardless of whether relationship repairs or whether you move forward separately with better understanding of how to evaluate people and how to perform, regardless of whether recognition comes early or late. This has never happened in reading before because the specific constellation of factors is rare. Their complete miscalculation, your dramatic emergence, the timing that makes their error costly, the visibility that makes revision impossible. And that combination creates a situation where someone's underestimation of you becomes teaching moment, not just for them, but for everyone watching, about cost of dismissing people based on incomplete assessment. They underestimated you. Past tense. That error is already made and consequences are already unfolding. And whether those consequences include them learning to evaluate more carefully or just you learning that you don't need validation from people who couldn't see you clearly, something valuable is being extracted from their mistake. What you do with being proven right, whether you're generous or whether you're boundaried, whether you let them back in or whether you protect your space from people who demonstrated poor judgment about you, that's your choice to make based on what serves your continued development, not based on what makes them comfortable with having been so thoroughly wrong about who you are and what you're capable of achieving.